Not see him. All right, Commissioner Hansen.
Present.
Commissioner Koenig.
Present.
Right. And I am the chair, Julie Lead, Commissioner Vice Chair Morley.
Present.
And Commissioner Kraft.
Present.
All right, welcome. And I'd also like to recognize we have Councilmember McCarthy, and I believe we have Councilmember Shimoni on the line. So welcome and thank you for joining us. And I noticed on the agenda, Jeff, that we have Lieutenant Ryan Turley with the Flagstaff Police Department. That is a new name. So I would like to welcome Lieutenant Turley. I don't know if Lieutenant Turley is with us. Does not appear so. All right. And Steph is on the line, and we've got David here with us as well as Dee. So welcome, and a few members of the public, and Mr. David Wessel's here too. So I would like to kick this meeting off with public comment. So at this time, I would like to invite any member of the public to address the commission on any subject within the commission's jurisdiction that is not on the meeting agenda for tonight. The Arizona open meeting law prohibits us from discussing or taking action on an item that is not on the prepared agenda. However, we can respond to criticism made by those addressing the commission, ask staff to review a matter, or ask that that matter be placed on a future agenda. So at this time, and I'd like to start with those that are here in council chambers to come on up. And I believe we have Mr. Wilson. And then after we do the folks here, or we hear from the folks here, we'll go online. And I would ask that we you strive to limit your comments to about 3 minutes. So welcome, Mr. Wilson.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Brian Lee Wilson, and I live in Boulder Point. In your June meeting, you heard numerous owners express concerns about the trial barriers on University Avenue. Commissioner Morley expressed her disappointment that residents remained unhappy and wondered whether a new approach was needed. Her idea was supported in the chat box online, but it wasn't formally acknowledged during the meeting, nor were additional public comments permitted. We had good participation at the meeting, even with less than 2 business days notice, but I wanted more feedback and I sent out a survey. As a courtesy, I sent a copy of the survey and some background material to staff a couple of weeks ago. I emailed 465 owners and received 305 surveys in return. That's a significant response rate of almost exactly 2/3. Just looking at those who expressed an opinion, I wanted to share a few findings. One, the neighborhood opposes the traffic circle at University and Majestic by a ratio of more than 4-to-1. Owners overwhelmingly do not, and that's by almost 10-to-1. They do not believe that the barriers on University will solve the traffic issues. And then finally, for tonight's finding, 6 times as many, more than 6 times as many residents support versus oppose Commissioner Morley's comment about an alternative approach that addresses concerns now and in the future. Before I finish, I wanted to make a comment on process. The last traffic study was completed on May 2nd before that meeting. I waited over 2 weeks for staff to analyze that data, and then I requested the information on May 19th, which was still 2 weeks before the June meeting. I didn't receive any files until 1 hour before the meeting, which basically gave me 0 time for analysis. I don't think it's fair to basically deny me data that I could have used to support my opinions on the barrier's effectiveness. Summing up, the development agreement stipulates that the city develop a system of traffic calming features that are acceptable to the neighborhood. You now have feedback from over 300 owners showing that they broadly disapprove of the current choices. What I'm asking the commission to do is to direct the staff to continue to work with Boulder Point residents to develop an expanded approach that includes some features as referenced by Commissioner Morley. So thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Vice Chair Morley, you are able to make a comment if you have any anything that you would like to respond to as far as the quotes. That's your choice, or if you'd like to leave it. Okay, I wanted to extend that opportunity to you. All right. And then just to let my fellow commissioners know, if this is something that you see warrants being placed on a future agenda for discussion, that would happen at the end of the meeting in the to from, and it would be made as a special request. And I think there's an agenda item talking about the process this evening that I'm looking forward to hearing. All right, thank you. All right, I'd like to invite Mr. Joe Donaldson up.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the commission. You've received a lot of my emails, I'm sure, over the past year, and it's almost a year to date that we did that traffic study. And I would let you know that if you were to do another traffic study, you find the speeds have really increased. The lighted signs that you had out there a couple of weeks ago or so, people come to that sign, slow down, and they speed right back up. When there's a police car on Monte Vista sitting there, as you know, it's amazing, absolutely funny to me. Cars go speeding down there and see a police car, and their rear lights turn on. And as soon as they get down there, they see there's no policeman in that car, or the policeman may be not watching them, they speed back up. This afternoon, about 1:15, I've been complaining about school buses. I know a couple of months ago, I complained about school buses bouncing across the road there. And school buses seem to slow down when they pass my house. This afternoon, about 1:15, the traffic was unbelievable going east on Linda Vista and a school bus. I would estimate his speed around 35 to 40 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. I think you probably have my most recent email that I sent out, I think it was either last week or sometime this week. I talked to a few neighbors, and they are beside themselves. Many will not come here because they've been trying to get this thing solved for a long time, and they don't want to waste their time. I don't have an agenda of what you guys are speaking to today. It would be kind of nice to hear what people have to say or what you have to say about if that is on the agenda about East Linda Vista traffic. With that, I'll sit down and importantly, thank the commission for the time they put into this. Having been on council for a few years, I know the work you guys do, and I know sometimes the council is very slow in responding to what you might request, and understand that. And again, I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Donaldson. That item specifically is not on tonight's agenda, but one item that you might be interested in is the residential traffic management program updates, and that is item 3 on our agenda. And that is talking about the process of how to go about mitigation.
Yeah, I would hope that the commission would put this on the agenda like the gentleman before. I am aware of what he's talking about, and I have to go to a doctor's appointment there every Friday, and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. People speed up there, they slow down for that, and they drive into the bike lane, and they continue on. Dangerous. And I wondered, wow, how'd that happen? Anyways, I think the university needs to be on the agenda, and also think East Linda Vista needs to be, since the traffic commission study we did last year indicates it is dangerous. And it's a number of people go through their speed. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, my Teams, and Steph, my Teams is locked up. Would you please help me in calling for public comment for those that might be joining us online? I can't see if there's something in the chat.
I'm here, Julie. I can help with this. It looks like our first public comment on here is Sasha Stortz.
Thank you. Sasha Stortz, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
I certainly can. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you for this opportunity. Thanks to all the work the commission is doing and to council members for being here. My name's Sasha Stortz. I'm a resident of the Cheshire neighborhood. I think the last time you heard from me was in February of this year when the city presented results of the traffic study for Cheshire, showing significant amounts of speeding along Fremont, and quite a few of our neighbors came to ask for consideration of right sizing and traffic calming on Fremont. This summer I asked city staff for an update and was told that they were looking at restriping to 1 lane in each direction with a center turn lane. So in other words, 3 lanes. We're currently at 4 lanes total. And I expressed some concerns with this, but didn't hear anything back. I have a small kid and a full-time job and didn't pursue it a lot until recently when we saw on social media some of the plans that really did kind of firm up that this was what was proposed for Fremont. What we've seen of this proposed plan is really disappointing. It doesn't do enough. It contains as many or more lanes as Highway 180, a busy highway, and isn't appropriate for our quiet neighborhood. I'm really worried that with 3 lines of traffic, the road will continue to feel really wide and people drive the way a road feels. With a turn lane, drivers can continue to speed unstopped. And they can pull around each other. One of the really key concerns is sorry, I'm getting some echo now. One of our key concerns
Apologies.
is really that crosswalk between the neighborhood and the playground across 4 lanes of traffic. We just want to be able to let our kids go to the playground by themselves as they get bigger, but there's no signage. It's poorly marked and folks just blow through that crosswalk. I've been in that crosswalk with my whole family, dog, kid on a bike, and had folks just tear right in front of me. It's pretty frightening and an accident waiting to happen. I'm really concerned that if there's a center turn lane, even if somebody's stopped in that crosswalk, somebody can pull around them right into the pedestrian. That's a common cause of traffic accidents. So I am really hoping that the commission, the staff can kind of reconsider and do something more. We don't feel like this is enough. I'm also a little confused about the process. I was expecting this to come back before commission and definitely would like some clarity on understanding. One of the suggestions that was made by, I believe, Commissioner Morley at that meeting was that staff engage the community in a small kind of mini plan. And we haven't been contacted about that, and I feel like that's kind of a lost opportunity. I know that some of what we're suggesting is probably a lot more expensive than restriping, but there are a lot of resources in this community. For myself, I write grants for my day job, and there are others in the community who have been in touch with FALA teachers about art project opportunities with crosswalk visibility. We really want to engage here, and I'm really hoping that it's not too late. I'm glad that folks are thinking about this and talking about this. But if this is a path that we go down, then we really need to know what the plan is to monitor the outcomes, because we're going to be back here asking for another traffic study when it doesn't do enough.
Thank you, Ms. Stortz. And I'll let you know kind of the same thing I communicated earlier if you heard that. We do have an agenda item related to residential traffic management program updates. That is something that you might be interested in listening to here. Just a couple agenda items down the list. And the item that you are talking about specifically in the Cheshire neighborhood is on that list of, I think, tentative upcoming in addition to the items we've heard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. I have Teams up and running again. So I see Councilmember Shimoni would like to make a comment.
I'm going to jump in here, Chair. It
Yes.
looks like we had one just above that from a Kyle Doherty. I may have butchered that last name.
Okay. If you could hold on, Councilmember. Kyle Doherty, please go ahead.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for allowing me to speak. I'm also a resident of Cheshire, and I'm interested in measures to mitigate speeding on Fremont. And I'm concerned that the plan put out on social media is insufficient. As an example of some of the traffic measures implemented in Flagstaff that I feel like are similar to these, like you can look to maybe San Francisco north of Cherry Street, where my understanding is that residents complained about speeding on their road as well, and eventually they got a center median put in. And I think for like someone who's new to that area, they might find that surprising and slow down, but someone who's familiar with an area can anticipate that and still speed quite quickly through on autopilot. Like I've seen people go like 40 on San Francisco. So I think right sizing Fremont is still a worthy pursuit. But I think really what's critical is putting a more aggressive measure, such as a stop sign right at Cheshire Park, where Brenda and Fremont intersect. I think that will, for one, like increase the like penalty for like rolling a stop sign, but also, yeah, give people pause. I think few people will be willing to roll a stop sign. And I guess my second ask would be to just generally increase the ability to cross Fremont, and specifically putting a crosswalk somewhere between the park and 180 would be quite helpful, so families aren't trying to run across Fremont. Yeah, so generally, again, I support any sort of right sizing, installation of medians. These things can definitely slow folks down. But yes, I think a stop sign is required at Cheshire Park to really do the job that needs to be done here, and hope that the planners are listening. Thank you for your help.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. And yes, we are all listening. All right, Councilmember Shimoni.
Thank you, Chair Lead and Commissioners. Good to be with you. Sorry, there's a big school bus passing me right now on the road, but I am pulled over on my bicycle. Just wanted to welcome you all to today's meeting. Very much looking forward to the conversation you're going to have. Real packed agenda and a real important one. And also, I also wanted just to comment on some of the comments I've been hearing. Something I'd like to see the city do more is outreach and education, and really work towards culture change, because we're not going to be able to enforce our way out of these issues around speeding. And we can design the best we can, but to the recent results of the Boulder survey with their right sizing efforts or their traffic mitigation efforts or speeding mitigation, people are going to do what they're going to do at times. And so some kind of education and outreach, I think, would go a long way in addressing this. The next thing I wanted to just mention to you all is my understanding, Chair Lead, is that you all meet once a month or once every 2 months. And just given the weight of the work you all are tasked to take on, I just wanted to share, I don't know if that's adequate in terms of the amount of meetings that y'all are having in a year. And then lastly, I just wanted to plant a seed with you all to think about focusing a conversation, maybe a future agenda item, on school children and how kids get to and from school as a focused discussion within the idea of congestion. I'm looking at Milton right now, and it is backed up. And how many parents are picking up their kids right now, contributing to this backup is what's going through my head, plus other factors, right? But school kids play a big role in this. Anyways, there's a train coming. I'll leave it there. Have a great meeting, and thanks for hearing me out.
Thank you, Councilmember Shimoni. Do we have any other members of the public that would like to address the commission for items not on the agenda? This is the final call. All right. We have the approval of minutes. Minutes are coming maybe the next commission meeting. Big thanks to Dee and her work on that. We do keep recordings of these meetings, so you can go back and listen to the entire thing if you'd like. So now I'd like to move to election of officers. I have been chair for, I don't know how long, it's been at least a couple of years now. And so it's time for perhaps somebody else to take this seat moving forward. And I would propose that this person who's interested from the commission would begin that service starting the next meeting. So part of the election for officers, we do need to make a motion and vote on that. And to kick that off, what I would like to do is start with our vice chair, our current vice chair, Morley, and ask your interest in serving as chair, and then be able to have a discussion with commissioners on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am willing to serve as the chair, but also open to someone else who wants to fill that role.
Okay. So I look to my fellow commissioners. Well, I'm looking at Commissioner Hansen right now, and I don't see, I know we have Commissioner Kraft and Commissioner Koenig on as well. I want to check in with you and see if that this is a position that you wanted to fill. Commissioner Kraft, I see you're sharing your screen.
And that is all, I'm afraid.
Okay. Okay, I was just checking.
I support Kate if she's wanting to take that over.
Okay. Right, Commissioner Koenig?
I do not have aspirations of chair at this point in time, and I think Kate would be a great chair.
All right, then I will make a motion. I make a motion to have Kate Morley, current Vice Chair Kate Morley, serve as chair effective at the next meeting in December. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Hansen seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Welcome. Thank you. And now we need to move to vice chair. And maybe we have some awkward silence here. Is there anyone that's currently serving on the commission that would like to step into the role of vice chair? And Commissioner Morley, Vice Chair Morley.
Sure, I can provide some assurance to the commissioners that there's not that much extra work, maybe none, associated with the vice chair position because staff do all the work.
Well, I'm happy to volunteer for that.
Thank you, Commissioner Hansen. Commissioner Kraft, is that, are you okay with that? Or do you have a comment or question about that?
No, that sounds good. It looks good on your resume, and you don't have to do very much. Kate is always here.
Commissioner Koenig, I hear from you.
That's fine with me.
All right, then call for a motion.
So moved. I guess we didn't have a motion. So
Yeah, will you please make a motion
yes.
and then call for a second? Make a motion.
I move to appoint Commissioner Hansen to the vice chair position.
And a second.
I second the motion.
All right. Any other questions or discussion items? All right. Call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Welcome, Vice Chair Hansen. Chair Morley, Vice Chair Hansen. Thank you. That's exciting. All right. So now we can move to new business. I do see Councilmember Shimoni, you have a comment. Is it related to elections or the next agenda item?
Yes, the elections.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank you personally for your service to this commission, and didn't realize this was on tonight's agenda, but so grateful for what you've done for the city of Flagstaff through this work on this very important commission, and really just wanted to express appreciation. So thank you, and thank you to those who are stepping up, and looking forward to the future. But thank you, Chair Lead, for your service.
Thank you, Councilmember Shimoni. All right, let's move to new business. And I'd like to welcome Mr. David Wessel with Metro Plan. Stride on forward here, Dave. Nice. For a regional transportation plan update. And as part of the introduction, I just want to remind folks that are listening, that are here, that Metro Plan has been hosting community meetings. There was one last night, I believe. There's going to be one tomorrow at noon, and then there is the final one for this phase on Saturday morning, I believe at 9 a.m. So I'm hoping to catch the Saturday morning one, Dave. I didn't catch last night. But welcome, look forward to hearing about your work.
Yeah, right after cartoons.
Okay. And cereal with lots of sugar.
Let me bring up my presentation here, I think. There we go. Well, good evening, and thank you for having me. David Wessel, Planning Manager with Metro Plan. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Here to talk about Stride Forward, our regional transportation plan. We'll give you a little bit about Metro Plan, a little bit about the plan itself, and then the process we're going through, including addressing changes from the last plan, looking ahead to 2045, and then how we make this all real in terms of some of the concepts, and then close out with next steps and Q&A. We are the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the region. You can see the map there. It extends from Belmont to Winona, and then from Kachina Village north of the Peaks. Our modest vision is to create the finest transportation system in the country, and to do that by leveraging cooperation to maximize financial and political resources for that system. As an MPO, we are the federally recognized planning organization. We are comprised of the members you see on the screen, the city, the county, NAU, Mountain Line Transit, and ADOT. And not just because planning is part of our name, but we do believe that planning is important and helps us make better choices about how we invest our resources and to think about ultimate goals, not just immediate concerns. So what is Stride Forward? Stride Forward is the next iteration of our regional transportation plan. This is a document that we produce every 5 years, and it looks ahead 20 to 25 years. It talks about how we're going to make investments in transportation in the region with the money we reasonably expect to have available. And that's going to be important as we get deeper into this. As some context, I'd like to remind people that our past plans have been influential in funding many of the transportation improvements that we all enjoy today, such as Mountain Line Transit, the Foots Trails, and the 4th Street Overpass came out of Transportation to Decision 2000. And then in 2018, voters approved an extension of the road and ped and bike improvements, as well as the overpass. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Some of the terms we're going to use tonight, you're all familiar with, but for all of the people watching, we'll walk through this briefly. We'll talk a lot about VMT, vehicle miles traveled. And if you look at the lower figure or image, you see one car, it travels 1 mile, that's 1 VMT. If you had 4 cars traveling 10 miles, it's 40 VMT, and that's pushing my math skills right there. If you look at the larger image to think about how this might affect in a daily travel, this little individual residing in what looks like an outhouse, if they travel to work 11 miles and then 10 miles to get coffee and 2 miles home, and maybe they go 2 miles to the store and 3 miles to get gas and a mile home, and they do all that by car, that's 29 vehicle miles travel. So when we look at community design, I'm going to use this same image. The distribution of those land uses is a component of community design. If we were to rearrange those, move them closer, make them more compact or dense, that's another aspect of a way of manipulating community design. The way that's all connected can also be an aspect of that, but it's also the transportation investment. In our VMT illustration, if they took a car using roads, that's one type of investment. But we could put our investment into transit or bikes or pedestrian facilities like sidewalks to create options. And those options are the mode by which you travel, walking, biking, or taking the bus or taking your car. The last thing to mention here is travel demand management, or TDM. And this is how we would provide incentives or disincentives to make choices between those modes, as well as the information to allow people to make informed choices. So with those terms behind us, what have we done so far? We have looked at existing conditions. What is our current level of vehicle miles traveled? What is our land use patterns? We've looked at recent changes that we've experienced, and we'll walk through those. We're modeling future conditions, a couple of alternatives using our regional transportation model, and we're coordinating with other plans. The city and county are kicking off the regional plan, the carbon neutrality plan, the active transportation master plan, which is going to be adopted. Let's all take a moment to raise thanks for that here in just a couple of weeks. And then a 5-year transit plan, the Flagstaff in Motion. And we've also been out engaging the community in pop-up events and a number of surveys and the events that Chair Lead referenced earlier. And what are we hearing from them? We're hearing support for climate action, fairly strong, about 75%. Support for expanded transit service and pedestrian and bicycle modes. Preferences for 2- to 3-story buildings over taller buildings, and mitigating that density increase with parks, open space, and things like transit, access to transit. We've heard about concerns for safety, particularly amongst pedestrian and bicyclists, gaps in the systems, particularly for pedestrians and bicyclists, but also for transit in terms of underserved areas within the city and outlying communities, and then concern about housing prices. So what has happened since our last plan, Blueprint 2040, which we adopted in 2017? Well, COVID-19 has happened, and that has had an effect on travel, and we'll talk about that. We've had climate and housing emergencies declared. The hospital is relocating, or planning to. Inflation is affecting how much we can build or the services we can provide. Propositions 419 and 420 have been approved back in 2018, as I referenced. And then the carbon neutrality plan is playing a pretty strong role in our approach to this, to stride forward. So as a little background, here's Proposition 419. You should all be very familiar with this. Lone Tree Road improvements, providing parallel route to Milton. Extensions of John Wesley Powell, providing parallel route to I-40. Capacity improvements to 66 in Butler. And then you can see in the lower left of the image all of the ped and bike improvements that were estimated to be provided. This all provides access to future housing opportunities and jobs. Also approved was the Lone Tree Overpass, Proposition 420, which completes that parallel route to Milton, helps balance traffic between Milton and Lone Tree, avoids train delays, and improves access for emergency services. And then there's the carbon neutrality plan. In the inventory done for that plan, 40% of greenhouse gas emissions come from gas-powered vehicles and the transportation sector. Being the transportation planning organization, this is pretty important to us, and so this is a focus. So one of the things we're trying to do is, through this planning effort, is see how we can reach the ambitious goals of the carbon neutrality plan. Key amongst those is holding vehicle miles of travel, or VMT, to 2019 levels by 2030. So no growth, which means we're all driving less. And to do that, shifting modes to walk, biking, and bus, where 54% of all trips are taken by those modes. And as a subset of that, 34% of work trips are by those modes. So let's take a look at these work trips. 34% is that goal. We're about 14% today. But if we look at, pre-COVID, but if we look at cities like Boulder, Davis, and other Western college towns, and look at the best of those in each of these categories, walking, biking, and transit, they're reaching 40%. So it's certainly possible. And I was just talking with a practitioner in Boulder, and Boulder had set a goal of maintaining VMT to 1990 levels, and they did that some time ago. And they're fairly successful. They're a little bit over right now, but not a lot. So even that VMT goal is being achieved by a somewhat similar community. So how do we look ahead to 2045? We project population employment forward. Using state figures, we think that's around 20%. And we configure that in a couple different ways. One is our onward plan, which is staying the current course with land use plans, the exception being the relocation of the hospital, which we're considering. Staying within available budgets, so the funding for 419, 420, current transit funding. And when we analyze that, we see that it increases VMT from 2019 by 460,000 miles per day. So that's our target. That's what we're trying to reduce or eliminate. And that's what we try to do with the upward concept. So that 2019 level is about 2.4 million miles per day. And to keep it at that level and avoid that 460,000 miles, we use community design to shift where people live and work. We invest in walking, biking, and transit, and cost is no object. That's a very important difference between the onward plan and the upward concept. So I want to talk about each of those approaches, first kind of an aggregate, and then break them down. So when we look at community design, that helps us reduce miles by about 85,000 per day. When we increase our transportation investments in these non-auto modes, we gain another 183 miles of reduction. And when we apply travel demand management, including work from home, we reach our goal by adding another 207,000 miles to that daily reduction. So we actually exceed the goal. And I want to talk about each of these a bit. So we actually reviewed several different community design patterns. And this was the one that we found most effective, concentrating or focusing 50% of new jobs in the downtown, and new jobs and residences in the downtown and 4th Street. We looked at a corridor concept. We looked at all downtown. We looked at different levels of shift. We found this to be the most effective. Putting people closer together allows shorter trips by car, which is less VMT, allows trips to be made by walking, biking, and the bus, which also looks like less VMT. If you recall from the earlier slide, has very little effect, relatively little effect. Why? Because we're talking about 20% of growth out to 2045. You ratchet that back to 2030, you're talking about 10% or less. Put that in the mix of everything that exists today, and it just really doesn't tip the scales very much. But there were a couple things that we think are interesting and that we're going to take to the regional plan scenario process. As we create congestion, people are going to take longer trips to go around that congestion. We all do that to avoid Milton. That was a point of discussion earlier. And so that's adding VMT. Similarly, when you create these nice places to go with lots of choices, people are willing to take longer trips to get there, which can create VMT. And so we actually did experiment with shifting less of the employment to those areas, keeping it more spread out, And we did find that that was effective. So again, lessons learned that we're taking into the regional plan process. As we look at transportation investments, I'll go through these quickly and then talk a little bit more towards the end. For transit, it's more buses, more often, and more places, with better shelters and other amenities. For peds and bikes, it's more bicycle lanes, more trails, more connections. Connectivity is very critical for shortening trips, making sure those gaps are closed by completing the system, and really enhancing our crossings. As I said, for pedestrian, it's very similar, and you can see these crossings: a regular striped crossing, a rapid flashing beacon, full signal, and grade separated. Here's where my hat is a reminder. We have a great opportunity through the Downtown Mile grant to put in some grade separated crossings. I would argue that these really need to be iconic. And I think there'll be things that people will be excited about and talk about as they come to downtown, visit Flagstaff. So just put in that plug. So now I want to talk about travel demand management and work from home. With COVID, we saw what we think is about a 3%, we're estimating about a 3%, I'll call it structural or permanent reduction in work from home work trips. And this is, as we look at 30% of jobs in the county can be work from home, and about 16% of EMT is from work trips. So you look at those in combination, it's a relatively small impact, but it's about a 3% reduction. With a strong TDM program, we think that can be increased. So what does a strong TDM program look like? It looks like this. There's about 10 things. There's a lot more that can be done, but there's several that have kind of quantified impacts that we can look to. So bike and pedestrian amenities. This goes beyond just the trails and the lanes. It's things like shade structures, drinking fountains, bike repair stations, parking, just to make things safer and more convenient. Share programs for bikes, scooters, cars, and maybe parking that benefits those. We already have some good transit pass programs, but putting those on steroids, van pools, marketing, and then the disincentive on here is parking fees. Some people look at congestion as a management tool. That could be an incentive or a disincentive. But those are all things that can be managed to influence choices and then getting the information out there. So how would upward occur? And I'll take a pause and say onward is already funded. It's already happening. We don't really see new guaranteed revenues coming in to the system much. So, we're fiscally constrained. How would we make upward happen? Well, there's a couple things you need: policy and money. And this is Miles' phrase, change requires change. He's trying to get that to be on par with the Eisenhower quote. He uses, plans are irrelevant, but planning is everything, something to that effect. So we're going to try to promote the change requires change. So some of the policies that we're looking at in the arenas I talked about: community design, really expanding those urbanized areas, increasing their density, making them more connected. Does not have short-term influence that we'd like, but long-term, really something that we need to commit to if we want to see the upward policy and long-term climate change be impacted. Transportation investments, slowing down the investments for cars, increasing and expediting facilities for the other modes, and then pushing travel demand strategies. There's a check there. We're pleased to announce that MetroPlan has received some formula funds out of the new federal bill, and we're going to be hiring a TDM coordinator. I think that's the name of the position. So we can actually get these programs up and running. A lot of good stuff is happening across all of our partner agencies, and hopefully this will help expedite, coordinate, and amplify those. So the next piece is how much will it cost? And again, we're looking at reaching this by 2030. Well, as we modeled these things, we see a need to double transit service. It's currently about $12.5 million per year, so this would be up to $25 million a year. And we need to quadruple the bike and pedestrian facilities. So that's what we have on the ground today, 4 times as much. And you know, some rough estimates, albeit, but estimates $53 million a year for the next 8 years. In context, Proposition 419 has about $29–30 million for ped and bike facilities over 20 years. So this is a very large increase. By comparison, the TDM program investment looks almost free at $160,000 a year. I will say that implementing some of the programs above and beyond a staff person, you know, it's going to take additional funding and resources. And then the community design incentives, we don't really have a cost associated with that, but there are regulatory and other means that could be put into place. So as we wrap up the presentation and move towards wrapping up the regional transportation plan, we're working on policy and strategy development. I want to thank Commissioner Chair-elect Morley for her help in pulling those policies together. As current Chair Lead mentioned, we are having virtual meetings. We had one Monday night that was a nice conversation, and we're trying to vary the time, so Thursday at noon and then Saturday at 9. It's basically the presentation you saw here, and then we'll have the Q&A. We'll draft the document and go back out to the public with our executive board meeting, again around the noon time on November 3rd, and then have adoption by the board December 1st. God willing, and the creek don't rise, as they say. So with that, I'm here to answer questions, should you have any.
Commissioners, questions for Mr. Wessel? Commissioner Kraft.
Hi, David. Thanks for the presentation. I was just struck by something. What were the miles called at the beginning? I've already forgotten. The little outhouse guy. Total
vehicle miles traveled, VMT.
Vehicle miles traveled. I was just thinking how we're all we have so many draws on our attention. And I also have noticed recently, I'll bring this back, it's just that APS has started sending out emails sharing, your own usage back to you, and driving electricity, savings, and congratulating you if you have, used less, and then giving you tips on how to do that. I'm just curious in conferences and, your connections to the transportation world, have you ever heard of an app that measures those miles or measures people's transportation in a way that could almost be gamified, like tracking? People don't realize, like you're saying, if that person went that far to get coffee, they're doing, quite a few miles per day. A way of kind of putting it in front of people how far they're going and ways they could do it differently.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair, Commissioner Kraft. It's good to see you again. Yes, I think there are apps that allow you to do that, and there are programs that have been in place for a while in a number of communities. I mentioned Boulder for one, where you can track your miles, and there are competitions, and sometimes little tchotchkes like water bottles and other things to give incentives, sometimes something larger. I know with the Bike to Work Week, they have a competition, similar to that. I think it's the honor system, and we know that we are all honorable people here in Flagstaff. But yeah, there are, Strava is a GPS tracking system for people who like to keep track of where they bike. There's all kinds of hiking apps. So I'm confident there's things out there that we could take off the shelf and start employing to encourage people to track what they're doing and report back to them.
Yeah, I just think it would be, some way to make it fun for people and to get it out in front of the public, because like I say, there's so much competition for attention these days. And, it's like you have to have the capacity to put the people on the bus, but you have to also let the people know the bus is there and what the routes are. And so, anyway, I just was seeing all those things come together in the moment. Thanks again.
And I appreciate that. And I think it is part and parcel of that culture shift that Councilmember Shimoni mentioned earlier, to really kind of keep this top of mind and help make that shift.
Dave, is the focus on VMT really to get to carbon emissions? Is that the direct correlation, or is there more to VMT than carbon emissions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's an excellent question, and probably something we should have included in our presentation. Certainly, VMT is tied to carbon emissions as long as you're driving a fossil fuel vehicle. But there are other community benefits to reducing VMT. Fewer cars on the road means fewer collisions, so it's going to increase safety. Improving accessibility for cars and bikes have health implications in terms of allowing people healthy choices to travel. So there's a broad array of community goals associated with reducing VMT. Another component not really mentioned here is electric vehicles. We will have a policy plan or component to the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, addressing EV and charging stations and incentives for adopting that. And of course, the more electric vehicles that we have, the fewer emissions from those. So that is an important component. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Commissioners, other questions? Vice Chair Morley. Comments, questions?
Thanks for the presentation, Dave. A couple thoughts I had just listening. So I don't think I've seen you present. I've seen this several times, but I don't think I've presented or seen the version where you had the 460,000 miles a day as a target. And I really like that, because I think it gets to all the things you were just talking about, like, duh, why wouldn't we want to reduce vehicle miles traveled 460,000 miles a day for a whole host of reasons, including congestion and wear and tear on our roads. So I like that expansion of the reasons for pursuing a VMT reduction over just carbon neutrality. I also really loved your pitch for iconic grade separated crossings. I think that has the ability to transform downtown, and I hope we can figure out how to make sure these improvements are iconic with a finite pot of money. I also really liked Commissioner Kraft's comment about the gamification. I think that's really interesting, and we'll be curious to see what your new TDM planner can come up with for that. And I think my final thought on this was so many of the things that you were presenting are also related to the public comments we heard tonight in terms of crossings and safety and making things more walkable and more pleasant. And so just seeing all those connections come together. So I look forward to seeing what comes out of Stride Forward.
Thank you.
Other commissioner questions or comments?
Hi, I have some comments and questions.
Is that Commissioner Koenig?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation, David. One of my comments is in some ways building off Commissioner Kraft's suggestions, gamify. One of my colleagues spent some time in Germany, and in Germany, the company would donate 1 cent per kilometer for commuting miles for the year. And so that doesn't sound like a whole lot of money, but it is some kind of incentive for people to ride their bikes. And then at the end of the year, you know, you may have pedaled a whole ton, but you know, in addition to that, your company donates 100 or 150 bucks because of what you did. And you know, with enough people, that can add up. So it's a, you know, an incentive to help encourage commuting, and it could even be a way to encourage competition between businesses of, you know, who can get the most people to pedal their way into work, or you know, take the bus or walk as well. And then I have a question. I guess I was trying to look at the website, and it wasn't entirely clear to me the wording of Prop 419, but was the split between bike and pedestrian and vehicle defined in Prop 419, or is that adjustable to some degree, and could we shift more of the Prop 419 funding to alternative transportation modes?
So I'll give you a little history on Proposition 419 and how it came to be shaped the way it was. As far as the ability to shift funding between project types, that's probably a question for the city attorney. So when we put together our last regional transportation plan, which was really the foundation for the questions that went before the voters in 2018, you know, we projected the funding that was available, and the funding sources at the time were several taxes, one for ped and bike improvements, and others for general road improvements and so on. And so those were combined into Proposition 419 as a single tax, a little easier to administrate, maybe a little easier to communicate. And in our plans and our communications, we kind of started with that balance and then looked at what we thought we could achieve and what was needed with some of the projected growth. So we were really looking at the connection out to the airport to support economic development, looking at improvements to Lone Tree Road, and that connection from John Wesley Powell out to I-17 to provide that alternate route to Milton. Butler Avenue had some development funding going to it, was reaching congestion and needed capacity improvements, similar to West 66. So those were our priorities in the plan. In that funding stream, we could not afford the Lone Tree Overpass. And so similar to what we're doing today, you know, we put that in the plan as saying, hey, we can't afford this now, but here's what we think the benefits are and here's what the cost is. And so in a similar vein, we're doing that with Onward and Upward. This is what we can afford to do now. If you want to achieve these particular goals, you know, the carbon neutrality plan, you know, here's some very broad brush cost increases. We don't really have that broken down into projects, but they're kind of broad project types and the type of influence they'll have on vehicle miles of travel with no choice. I hope that answered your question. You know, I guess I'll back up. Commissioner Kraft was on a tax commission that helped review all of that, put it together, and take it to council. Then we went to voters. So I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, David. So I guess a further follow-up question then would be, once you finalize this stage of Metro Plan, would you anticipate another round of potential propositions going before the voters in 2023 then?
Well, not to get too wonky, but I believe we go in even years. Okay. So 24 would be the next opportunity. And that's really going to be part of the community discussion. That's what this upward concept is about, is to, you know, kind of plant the seed for what needs to happen. I mentioned the Active Transportation Master Plan. I think if you look at that total bill, if you will, that's about $200 million. And as I mentioned, there's $30 million plus a $6 million grant going towards that, so about $170 million to do all of the ATMP. And we're estimating that we need to do that much again to get where we need to be. So there's those propositions, or excuse me, should not use that phrase. There's those projects that are out there that could be considered, kind of immediately by the public should City Council want to take that up. Because right now they're transportation sales taxes. Similarly, Mountain Line's working on Flagstaff in Motion, their 5-year transit plan. It has a number of scenarios, and they'll be having discussions here soon, I believe, to look at propositions that they may want to bring before council for additional transit funding. And hopefully this gives them a sense of scale, at least relative to that carbon neutrality plan. And then it's the will of the voters. Well, the will of the council and then the will of the voters. So thank you for the question.
Thanks for the clarification. That's all my comments, questions.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Koenig. All right, call for public comment. Do we have any members of the public that would like to address the commission on this particular agenda item? All right. I do not see anything in the chat. Okay, I think we're good. Dave, thank you so much. I look forward to watching on Saturday, participating in the community. For this presentation, you had some great information and stats in there. Is this available online, that particular presentation or that information?
We can certainly make it available.
Okay,
So.
I think that would be very helpful to be able to share with folks.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. All right, moving to new item 2, pedestrian and bicycle program updates. Is Martin Ince taking this one? All right, welcome Martin. So this is a review of current near-term pedestrian and bicycle capital improvement programs. This is for review and discussion. Wherever you are, Martin.
I'm out here. Thank you, Chair Lead, members of the commission. I'm sharing my screen, but can you? I'm not sure what happens when I'm doing this remotely.
Oh, we can see it online.
Oh.
Does anybody know a way around that technology? Is it possible to share it in the chambers?
We see it now, Martin. Commissioner Kraft, do you see it online?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay. So this is a presentation that we made to the city council at their retreat last week. And the intent was to kind of show how we're moving from planning and budgeting for projects to actual implementation. So we kind of went through the process with them and then closed with a number of examples of how we're implementing ped and bike projects, kind of as a follow-up to the planning. So for starters, for that presentation, we listed the typical steps in project delivery method. So we began at the top with planning, which is simply identifying where we need facilities or where we're missing facilities. Since we typically end up with a lot more than we can afford to build, process of prioritization is very useful to identify the ones that are most functional. We find funding for those priorities, and then it really becomes part of the city's capital programming process. Capital programming works like we plan for 5 years out, and so the projects that we identify for next year are included in our budget request. And the next 4 years after that are entail the capital plan, 5 years total. Once that's in place, assuming that we get that funding through the budgeting process, then we go on to scoping and design, and then finally construction. So we've spent a bunch of time talking about the first 4 points on that list. And so we're transitioning into the bottom 3. And so that, again, the intent was to kind of give you an idea of what we're working on and how we're doing that. So just real quickly to recap the planning and prioritization part. In the draft ATMP, Active Transportation Master Plan, we have infrastructure recommendations for a variety of facilities, mainly sidewalks, bikeways, foot trails, and different types of crossings. We've also included some ancillary facilities that provide additional ways for people to get around. We've gone through prioritization, so the ATMP identifies the projects that are first priority, second priority, et cetera. That moves us into funding and programming, and here our 2 main sources of revenue was discussed a little bit in the previous item. The Proposition 419 transportation sales tax is $29 million over 20 years. Mountain Line has also obtained a first mile, last mile grant for $5.5 million. A total of $34.5 million over 20 years. The city is front loading that, so we'll have $2 million in the first 5 years, plus the first mile, last mile grant. So that's a total of $15.5 million for ped and bike projects in the first 5 years, and the remainder will be spread over the next 15 years after that. In our process, we look at programming over 2 timeframes. The 5-year timeframe corresponds to the capital planning, and 20 years corresponds to the life of the transportation tax. So it gives us an idea of what we might be able to build with the money that we have available now over the next 20 years. This part of the process is fiscally constrained, so we identify the projects that we can build with the money we have, and we don't go beyond that. And as I mentioned, it's all kind of part of it moves beyond the ATMP and is part of the capital improvements program. So with that, I'll move into some of the ways that we're implementing those projects with the money that we have available. And the first is what I mentioned before, the first mile, last mile grant. I mentioned it's $5.5 million. It was a grant obtained by Mountain Line. It's essentially for ped and bike projects that support transit. And we are looking at projects that are typically within the right of way. So the general categories are sidewalks, enhanced crossings, and bikeways. Our list of projects was developed in collaboration with Mountain Line. They gave us feedback on what projects they think would be most useful and helpful for transit, but they've also all been drawn from the projects listed in the Active Transportation Master Plan. Just a few days ago, maybe a week ago, we have released a request for statements of qualifications for design work. That design will be broken into 2 phases. First off, we're asking the designer to do scoping documents or 15% plans for all the projects. That's kind of a feasibility or shakeout exercise, and the ones that look most promising are able to move forward. We'll go to full design. And we are timing-wise working towards having projects under construction by next summer's construction season. So here I've included a couple of maps. This one shows in red sidewalks that we have planned as part of the first mile, last mile funding, and then crossings in blue. And you can see some of the sidewalk projects include crossings as well, down here at Lake Mary, along Fort Valley as well. And then in some cases, there are kind of standalone crossings or strings of crossings. This gives you an idea of the bikeways. Because we are working within the right-of-way, most of these bikeway improvements involve paint or striping improvements. And as a result, striping is less expensive than construction generally. So we're able to do more miles of bikeway enhancements than, say, building sidewalks. I'll just call attention, the ones in purple or violet are buffered bike lanes. So these are streets that may already have bike lanes. And the intent of that particular restriping would be to add a buffer between vehicle lanes and the bike lane to increase comfort for cyclists on those routes. Next project we are working on, we call Sidewalk Infill. These are short segments of sidewalks that are missing between longer pieces. So in a lot of cases, they're 100 or 150 feet or less. In some cases, they're like 20 feet, but there are just obvious gaps in our sidewalk system. Because they're short, they tend to be less complicated to build and deliver, so we can kind of do them more quickly. We have included that funding in the city's annual road repair and street safety program. So we've given a list of the sidewalks that we want built to that contractor, and they've built them as part of road repair and street safety. This is a map of where they occur. What's in blue has already been built. That was done last summer. What's in red is planned. We did have a handful of sidewalks planned for this summer, but that's been delayed. It still might happen. We're working with the project manager for road repair and street safety to get that done. And I'll just go back. We highlighted this image for the council during their retreat. It's a very short section of sidewalk that we built that connects the Flagstaff Bordertown dorms on Kinlani, if you're familiar with where that is, with Thorpe Road. And you may or may not be aware, but all of the young people who live at the Bordertown dorms go to high school at Flag High, and most of them walk to Flag High and back twice a day. So this little chunk of missing sidewalk between the dorm and Thorpe Road, there was a dirt path that they did their best to clean off and use, but in the winter it became kind of a muddy mess. So we built just a short, quick section of sidewalk, and it immediately became very well used. I'm kind of moving fast, but I hope if you have questions as we move along, just feel free to jump in and interrupt or raise your hand or throw something in chat. Next set of projects we call scoping, or 15% design. And here, similar to the first mile, last mile, we want to get some preliminary information about a number of projects. Our primary intent is to do kind of a feasibility, get more information about them, and to get a better idea of what they might cost. And then for the ones that look promising, we can move forward with full design or funding for it. So we've got 3 identified. The first one are 2 protected intersections at Beaver and San Francisco along Butler. And this is a relatively straightforward exercise. We're just asking the designer to overlay a protected intersection on top of the existing intersection. Give us an idea of what the issues might be in terms of constructability, and then give us an estimate of what that might cost. That really does 2 things for us. One is it kind of allows us to move forward with those protected intersections if they seem promising and we can find the funding. And then 2, it gives us an idea of what protected intersections cost. So as we move forward with planning other bikeways, we have an idea of what it would take to install protected intersections at other locations. And that comes in handy, for example, if we're applying for grants. The second project is, we call it phase 2 of the separated bike lanes along Butler between Milton and Sawmill. But this phase involves taking out the barriers that are there now, moving the curb out to where the bike lane line is, and then elevating it to the level of the sidewalk. So it's providing a different sort of separation for those bikeways compared to what's there now. And I would say the intent and the benefit of doing that is really the same as what I mentioned before. We get a better idea of how it works and what it would cost. And again, there's some ability to transfer that information to other future projects for things like cost and constructability. And then the last one we're looking at is a bikeway that goes through the middle of town, kind of ends up in that fringe between the west edge of campus and the east side of the businesses on Milton Road. And it really is intended to be kind of a high-speed, well, actually, it doesn't have to be high-speed. You can go as fast as you want, but a dedicated bikeway as kind of a parallel facility to Milton Road. So for the people who use Milton to get north-south through the middle of town, this would be available to them as an alternative. Presumably much more comfortable. And again, these are our goal here is for 15% designs. That last one in particular, I think if we get good funding estimates, and some nice compelling drawings, it really helps us advance a potential grant application if that becomes feasible. With the money we have from 419, we have a handful of kind of standalone ped bike projects. They're listed here. They include the Schweitzer Canyon Foots Trail from the roundabout at Turquoise all the way into downtown, sidewalks along the east side of 4th Street, Beacon Crossing at Butler and O'Leary on the south side, access connection between Mountain View and Hoskins that connects campus to the south side neighborhood in the area on the north side of the cemetery. The Fox Glen Foots in the vicinity of Little America, and then a handful of small Foots connectivity projects that either fill in missing gaps or provide better access and connectivity from neighborhoods. And then the final category that we'll talk about are ped bike facilities and other capital projects, and these are all fairly large capital projects. The first one being the Lone Tree Overpass. And ped bike facilities here include separated bikeways and a Foots trail, a protected intersection at Butler and Lone Tree, and then Foots connectivity to campus, which is really the same as the Hoskins Mountain View. Butler, this is the east end of Butler between Little America and 4th. And here we're planning on separated bikeways, a protected intersection, and Foots connectivity through the intersection at 4th and Butler. The downtown mile includes railroad underpasses at Flonut and downtown. Flonut is, I should mention, is shorthand for Florence Walnut. And those are the two streets on either side of the tracks that would connect. And then some good Foots connectivity. And I'll show you of what that looks like in just a moment. And the final one is the Rio to Flag, which will help with Foots connectivity through Townsite, the downtown neighborhood, La Plaza Vieja, all the way out to the west side. So just a couple of images. This is a Foots trail shown in violet here that would be built as part of the Lone Tree Overpass. And just for reference, at the north end here, this is Route 66. At the south end, this is the Sinclair Wash, Foots, and O'Leary. In this area, kind of in the middle of the screen, is the Sawmill area. So Foots along the west side of Lone Tree Road, pretty much that whole distance. And then the line that you see extending off to the left or to the west that connects over to the blue of NEU is that Hoskins Mountain View access. So really good connectivity for walking and biking, all the way from Route 66 down to Sinclair Wash and onto campus along Lone Tree. And I will point out that the line actually goes north of 66 and connects to the Schweitzer Canyon Trail. And if that's able to happen, there's buildings in the way and topography that must be overcome to make that happen. But if that can happen, this trail gives you a connection all the way up to Buffalo Park. So really starting to connect our community with Foots trails in a way that is separate from roadways. And then here's the one that's part of the downtown mile and the Rio to Flag project. And this is the central area of town. This shows primarily downtown and the south side, as well as the north end of NAU. And the underpasses are shown as gray squares. So this, I don't know if you can see my pointer or not. Does that work very well? Yeah, it works up. Okay. So this is kind of a main north-south artery of Foots trails and bikeways. And what makes them work are the two underpasses at Route 66 and the railroad tracks. So you really get kind of unimpeded access going through that part of town. And very similar, this is kind of an east-west access. This is the existing Route 66 trail. This is a trail that could go out west as part of the Rio to Flag project. And again, so you really have connectivity from the four cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, that come together kind of perfectly in the center of town. And then a series of underpasses really make it work pretty well. And the last thing I'll talk about is federal surface transportation legislation known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was signed into law in November of last year. And we're seeing over the past couple of months a number of grant programs being rolled out. Some of these are old programs that are being refunded. Some are brand new programs. A lot of them have good eligibility for ped and bike projects, and not necessarily small projects, but big projects as well. And here I'm talking about projects that are more like 5, 8, 10, $12 million. We're catching up on what some of these programs are and beginning to identify and match projects that would fit well within those grant categories. I think our next steps in moving that forward is to begin the fiscal planning for the match. Often these grants require some local match, sometimes as little as 5%, sometimes as much as 50%. And then I think if we're able to do some scoping work or 15% designs, that gives us really valuable information. It can help produce some compelling images, and it kind of sets us up with the information we need to have a successful grant program. So we're just beginning to work with that. Actually, I think Dave has left the room, but our partners at MetroPlan and our partners at Mountain Line as well are very helpful in that effort. So that was the conclusion of our presentation to council and my presentation to you tonight. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Martin. Commissioner, questions or comments? Steph, would you mind checking the chat?
I have
for me?
Joe Koenig here. I have one, mostly a comment. Martin, after seeing all the work that's gone with these plans over the past 5 years, it's really exciting to see some of them hopefully moving towards completion next year, and finally making those connections between all these disparate trails that hopefully increase usage of the system.
Thank you, Commissioner Koenig. Was there anything else you want to add?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Just thinking about what was presented for MetroPlan, the opportunity here to leverage the dollars that are in the 419 funding that were dedicated to bike and ped improvements. And those are standalone projects from the complete street projects that were also part of the 419. So, as we saw with the Lone Tree Overpass, there's a bike corridor proposed along the west side of Lone Tree that connects to Mountain View and that area. And those dollars those dollars aren't necessarily coming entirely out of that set aside specific to bike and ped, which is fantastic. And also with the IIJA to be able to leverage those funds and the partnering opportunity, like with the first mile, last mile grant. I mean, that's very exciting. You start seeing with MetroPlan the stride forward and taking that upward, and that becomes a reality. So thank you, Martin. I did have one question for you related to, in a couple of agenda items, we're going to be talking about the crash report. And I was just wondering, as you prioritize these projects, are those projects reconciled with the statistics of where we're seeing a lot of conflict points?
Cheerlead, in a general sense, they are. We use the crash data as one of the points of information to help us prioritize the projects. And that's kind of generally what it doesn't really do is identify specific problems at specific locations that require a detailed solution. So that's not necessarily in there, but I think in a general sense, some of these projects will address some of those spots and some of those locations.
Thank you, Martin. Any other comments or questions from commissioners? All right, hearing none, call for public comment. Do we have any members of the public that would like to address the commission on this item? Steph, are we good online? I'm frozen.
Yes. Everything online looks good.
Okay. Thank you, Martin. All right. It's about 5:30, so doing a quick time check here. We've got 3 more agenda items and then 2 from. So as we get through items 3 and 4, we may need to push item 5 to the next agenda. I just want to keep that in mind. That's the role of transportation commissioners. So that might be a good one to kick things off with in December at the next meeting with our new chair and vice chair. But I would like to continue and move into the residential traffic management program updates. And this will be a brief update, then we'll review and discuss. And this will come back to us on December 5th. And I'd like to welcome David, and excellent work on what you have prepared. I'm really excited to hear the presentation part of it. So welcome, David.
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? All right.
I can.
Okay. I assume it's good online too. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Madam Chair, for having me tonight. So I believe our intention was to have you review the document we sent that had all of our potential policy changes, and to come to some sort of conclusion in the next Transportation Commission meeting. But I can and would be happy to give a brief overview of what we were looking for. So our current residential traffic management guide, last time, well, when it was created was in 2012. So it's been a while since we've changed these policies or addressed them. And after hearing a lot of the public comments tonight, and we were trying to address some of the concerns we've heard from the public. And I think the biggest change you'll see when you read through this document is we want more public involvement to get these traffic mitigation projects installed. Right now, we're kind of being guided by traffic study data, and we're hoping to have a threshold where, okay, like we need 70% of the people who live in an affected area to be on board or to express approval for the traffic mitigation to be installed. Yeah.
Sorry, it's not critical, but it's not sharing your screen.
Oh, is it? Oh, no.
And I don't know why.
Okay. I got concerned. I was like, what's happening?
Okay. It's
Okay,
It's
yeah.
not critical because we're not presenting.
Yeah. And in this document, we do talk about other municipalities that have enacted changes similar to the ones we're hoping to do, like the city of Peoria, city of Scottsdale, and city of Tempe. They've all kind of revamped their management guides to have considerations like, okay, like we need the neighborhood that's affected to be in approval, and if they're not, we won't go forward with the mitigation. So any questions so far on any of that from the residential traffic management guide?
You're talking about the first part, or are you talking about the whole thing? You asking
Oh,
for questions on the whole thing or just what you said?
Just what I said, but I'd also be happy to answer any other general questions that might be out there.
Okay. And Jeff, you had something you wanted to add?
I'm happy to wait to summarize at the end. I'm good.
Okay. Keep going, David.
Okay, great. That's all I really have so far on that. So is it all right if I go on to the crash report presentation?
Oh, well, I think we still have a lot of, or I have some comments and questions about the
Okay.
policy itself. Sorry.
Okay.
So I guess I was thinking you might walk through some of the high level things, the policy changes, like there are certain things in there about establishing a budget.
Yes.
And maybe you could share the flow chart
Yeah.
on the screen to help folks understand what this proposed change is and what that process is. Yeah, so if you could walk us through that flow chart, I think that would be really helpful too for our community members that maybe didn't get a chance to see this before tonight.
Certainly, yes. So in this flow chart, okay. And I wonder if I can make this any bigger than it already is. Oh, perfect. There we go. So we tried to reduce the number of steps required for the traffic mitigation process. It used to be at 11, so we tried to reduce it down to 7 to make it more simple. But it would start with a citizen filling out an action request form, and part of that would be getting signatures from your neighbors. I think you need 5, or that's what we're proposing, 5 signatures from your neighbors, just to show that there's community support, because you'll probably need more, or you will need more support as the process goes on. The second step, once we get the citizen action form, is to do data collection and thresholds to see if the speeds and volumes like warrant traffic mitigation. And if they don't meet thresholds, the project would end and it could be requested again in 12 months. But if they do meet thresholds, we would develop a strategy and meet with the Transportation Commission to show them the strategies we've developed so we can choose the most appropriate one. And once we've selected a strategy that we all agree on, we would send out a document to the neighborhood. Like we'd determine which members of the neighborhood are being affected by traffic mitigation, send out a document that explains what the mitigation will be, and ask them if they'll approve of it. And they would have to sign it and send it back. We'd give them a month to reply to this document. And if we can get 70% approval, we would move on and do a trial implementation and see how it performs. But if we don't get approval, that would be the end of the project, and it could be requested again in 12 months. So let's say it did get approved, 70%, the neighborhood was in agreement that they wanted this mitigation. We'd set up a trial implementation, see how it performs. And then once we have data on how it performs, we'd have another Transportation Commission meeting, show the results, give the community another opportunity to come and talk. Like maybe they approved it, but when it was actually installed, they had different feelings, so they could come and express those, or like there was unintended consequences. And that would be the ultimate decision to say, okay, like, are we going to implement this, fund this, construct this, or was it ineffective, or were there other problems? If it wasn't effective, we'd go back to step 3 and come up with a new strategy and continue from there until we found the one that was most appropriate.
Got it. Thank you, David. And the process for a citizen would be completion of a simple form, collecting some signatures from the neighbors that live there within a certain area.
Yes.
Okay. And then that would get submitted to the city of Flagstaff, and then go through that data collection and processing. And then you have these checks in there of whether or not it moves forward to the next steps.
Correct.
Okay, just trying to simplify it, because I know we hear very regularly from folks about people's bad behaviors in their neighborhoods. We spend a lot of time at these meetings talking about that, and we need, I think the system that you've presented here is great, and one that I think with some more feedback and some more study that the commission can get on board with and move forward with. I think that will really help. And so we also maybe hear less of the frustration from members of the community of like, well, I've called a number of times, I've emailed, and that we have a process in place. And hopefully it'll also help manage staff time. That then if there's, not only a budget, but there's a set procedure in place, then it helps you focus on the ones that really hit that priority level. And that you don't have a whole bunch of requests competing equally when some maybe need more attention than others, for example. So those are my initial comments, but I'd love to hear some comments and feedback from other commissioners. Like, what do you need? I'd like to hear from other commissioners. What do you need in December? What more information to be prepared to take action on this?
I have a question on the neighborhood approval process, the 70% approval. How is it identified what the total number is for that neighborhood? Does that make sense?
A great question. When we were researching other communities, we had that question too. It's like they keep talking about the affected area, but a lot of them didn't really tell you how it was actually drawn. And I think it will be case dependent, like on the project, but our standard, or what we'd hope to do, is intersection to intersection. Like we have a street that has an issue from intersection to intersection, maybe like 20 to 30 houses. Like those would be the residents that we would reach out to get approval, because they would be the most directly affected. But of course, there's some cases where it could affect like a larger portion of the neighborhood. So in those cases, we might need to expand it a little bit. But I think our goal is to stick to intersection to intersection.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Vice Chair Morley and then Commissioner Kraft.
Thank you. I concur with our chair here that I think this is a really good step forward in updating our process since 2012. I know that I've been a fan of using that checklist all along and like having those processes to fall back on. A couple specific thoughts and questions here. Okay, so the budget, 75,000. I'm curious where, if that's 419 money, and then, you know, the capacity to make that an annual item, and is it enough, like seeing the rate at which we're seeing projects come forward and then the level of funding needed to do the mitigation, is it an adequate amount of funding to be addressing the number of concerns we're seeing that are hitting the checklist of yes, we should mitigate? Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, no, that definitely makes sense. And that's something we're hoping to figure out with discussion with you guys. Like from what we've researched in other communities, like the city of Peoria was one that did have a set budget of 60,000 a year. And we thought, okay, like maybe like 75 grand a year would be enough for 1 or 2 projects a year. And maybe that will slow down like the rate at which we're getting these requests. I believe currently we have 12 active traffic mitigation projects going, and funding from like how we've been funding them hasn't been very stable. Like it's always kind of like at the moment, okay, where can we find these funds? And we kind of scramble to find it. So we were hoping that with a set budget, it would at least guarantee we get a few projects done each year without like losing track of all the requests we're getting.
Thanks. I generally love the idea of having a budget. I just want to make sure it's adequate and then we're not facing some new dilemma of somebody came in first and they only scored 90 points and then we have a 110-point problem, but we're out of money.
Go ahead.
I'll add on. Thank you, David. That was very good. I wasn't sure how up to date you were on the budget stuff, but yeah, I mean, he's exactly right. We've been scrambling every year to figure these out. You said 12. I think I heard maybe 15 even active projects right now. So it's kind of off the hook, and we're just frankly not able to keep up with them all. So we've been telling people they have an order, and you can hear lots of frustration because they're not. Things aren't getting done as quickly as they like to get done, and for good reason for us. So the budget helps with that as well because it creates an expectation, like here's how much money we have, here's how many people potentially are ahead of you. But yeah, we like to talk about that. There is no funding source at this point, so we need to try to work through the CIP, see if we can carve out 75,000 or whatever the number is. Maybe it grows over time, but yeah, it's not, 75 won't be adequate for 15 or 12 neighborhoods, that's for sure.
Thank you. Well, I'm generally I'm supportive of getting there, however we get there. A couple more questions would be, let's see. Okay, so in the guideline itself, we struck the cut-through traffic, and I think that aligns with the conversations we've had about, you know, there are policies in this community about creating connections, and then, you know, discounting cut-through is counter to that. So I'm generally supportive of that. I think, you know, maybe a tweet. I think the biggest issue that we're hearing from communities is the speeding issue. And I personally am more worried about the speeding issue than the volume issues. And I think the way we cut that maybe gave a little bit more weight to excessive volumes than currently for speeding. So I don't want like an unintended consequence of giving extra weight, and I don't know that that's the case, but that was my read because I think it went from 25 points to 35 points. So I think that's, you know, that's just a comment you can look at. Let's see, more broadly, I like the citizens weighing in, but I worry about it at the pilot stage. I kind of want the citizens to weigh in at the final recommendation stage because I worry that getting 70% of people to try a pilot is a really high bar. I think it'll be easier to get people to respond to surveys if they're reacting to something that's been installed in their neighborhood than the concept of something installed. I know I can't get 70% of people to respond to any surveys that I put out. So just, you know, just looking at maybe moving that step for really after step 6 to get the buy-in, and I think that addresses like the Boulder Point concerns that we heard tonight. And then my final commission is a little bit bigger, or comment is a little bit bigger one, which is I know staff are spending a ton of time on these items coming through, and I know it takes time to prepare agendas and present to this commission. And I would be supportive of us moving in a direction where this becomes more of a staff enacted policy. The commission oversees, the adoption of the traffic management guide, but you don't have to come seek transportation commission. Like, I would be supportive of something where you just did the scoring, and if it met, then you move through the process. I think that I support staff, getting the education or whatever they need to do the traffic calming measures without the commission trying to design them. So I would also support a consideration like that if the commission wanted to go that direction and empower staff more often.
That's a great point. And we did notice in one community, I believe in Scottsdale, that the only time the Transportation Commission is involved is at the very end when they've done the trial implementation. Transportation Commission is there to decide if it should be constructed. And when I was drafting this, I was like, oh man, we have a lot of Transportation Commission meetings on this. Like I know they're like vital and they're important for community input. So I kept in both of them, but I was also wondering that as well, like if we really needed 2 meetings or if we could just do 1. So that's interesting.
Anything else? Okay. We'll go to Commissioner Kraft and then Commissioner Koenig.
Yeah, my comment was that last bit. I basically feel like it's appropriate for us to be involved as we create this whole thing, but eventually we want to get the commission out of it. My thought was that the commission would act as like an ombudsman if once this is all up and working, and if there's still a problem and the citizens aren't getting what they need, they have a means to reach out to us at that point, meaning we could be a problem-solving body, but we don't need to be. I mean, the goal in my mind is that we're not involved in these steps. We are hopefully flying a bit higher than this and doing other things, but anyway, so I support that concept that Kate mentioned at the very end of her comments, and would like to see us empower staff to take care of this. I mean, it seems like if you don't have staff dedicated to this now, you're probably going to in the next year or two because it's coming up so often. So thanks for all the work on this, and that is all.
Thank you, Commissioner Kraft. It's just all that David's going to be doing now.
Oh yeah. Can't wait.
All right, well, Commissioner Koenig, and then we have Councilmember McCarthy.
Thank you, David, for that presentation. I would say that I echo Kate and Commissioner Morley and Commissioner Kraft, and supporting that, our commission is involved in the last step and not necessarily in earlier steps. Some of my other comments, I'm a little concerned about the first come, first serve, just because we have a lot of these that are on the list, and if there are situations where one will affect more people or has higher speeds and it's more dangerous, I think it would be prudent to have a way of prioritizing that if necessary, as well as, one of the challenges that we have with traffic mitigation is that, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and the squeakiest one isn't always the most important one, or doesn't always affect the most people. So maybe if there was some caveat in there that some other prioritization method, certain situations. Based on your references in some of these other cities, it seems like they use traffic cushions a lot more, which I'm assuming is a euphemism for a speed bump, and stop signs. And I can see how this process could move quickly and be really effective if what we're talking about is adding speed bumps and stop signs. I'm not, it doesn't seem to me, based on the things I've seen so far, that we really have the tools we need to mitigate speeding. And so if you look at the situation that we're in at the university, so I'm just curious to get some more thoughts and inputs on that, because that may be the root cause of why we have a backlog, is because there are a lot of complaints about speeding. We don't really have good tools for speeding. And so, just some thoughts around that.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Koenig. David, did you catch all that? Your sound was a little faint. I think I heard everything.
I
I want
got
to
it,
make
yeah.
sure. Okay, good. So I'm going to do a check-in with Commissioner Hanson. So I want to get a sense if there's, consensus on less involvement in the details with the Transportation Commission, and us being kind of a check at the end, or providing that support at the end, or making some of those critical decision points. Does that sound like a reasonable thing to you?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with the conversation, the discussion going on with it, getting to a place where the commission's less involved in not having to come here, slowing down the process and being an impediment. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember McCarthy, and then Vice Chair Morley.
Oh, absolutely.
In the part of the process where we ask the neighbors if they want to do a project or not, I think it's very important that it be done in a way that they can be honest and not feel pressured from their neighbors. In other words, if you mail something out to them and they can, put a yes or no, or however it's phrased, and then send it back to the city, I think that is appropriate. I think that's what's in the plan, because I did look at it this afternoon. I know of cases where some neighbors have felt very pressured to take a certain position when in their heart they didn't really believe in that. I'll just mention that I live in Boulder Point, and not everybody there wants what's happening. A lot of my neighbors are saying, what in the hell are we doing here, So I just would hope that there would be, I think that one's pretty much a done deal, but in the future that we do the surveys in a way that people can be honest and not feel pressured by their neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Right, Vice Chair Morley.
Sorry, that discussion led me to one more comment, which is budget related again. So hearing that there's 15 projects in the pipeline, I think it was maybe Commissioner Kraft who said maybe we need a dedicated staff person to this. 75,000 isn't going to get us through 15 projects. I wonder if the commission could do something to support a budget request in the next fiscal year to try to catch up on projects, and maybe support a staff position. I don't know if that's ever been done before, if like the commission wrote a letter to council requesting these items, and if that would assist in getting some of them done. And maybe this first year is bigger than 75,000 to try to catch up with all the requests that we have.
Can I respond to that? One of the functions of this commission is to make recommendations to council. So without taking position on this issue, yes, you should, if the commission feels that that's appropriate, you should let council know. And obviously it will go through the staff process too. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Do we have any members of the public that would like to address the commission on this particular agenda item? Are we good on the chat? Goes in and out for me.
We are good, yes.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, David. Great work on this. I was really excited to see this on the agenda, and look forward to further discussion in December. I think that was a great comment, Kate, about providing the support or, writing a letter on behalf of the commission to council in support of that in this effort?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Right. So next up on our agenda, we'll do one more, I think the annual crash report, and then we'll just do a quick check-in on old business. All right, so David, this is for review and discussion.
All right, thank you so much. So today I'll be presenting on the annual crash report. So this is the first crash report created by the city, and it focuses on crashes specifically within the city limits. This annual report would be used to identify crash patterns and locations, assess past mitigation efforts, and recommend crash mitigation strategies. For background, MetroPlan does send out the Regional Strategic Transportation Safety Plan, typically every 5 years, which also reports on safety and crashes within the MetroPlan boundaries. And the last one was in 2018. So this one would just be more frequent for the city, and it would also focus on specifically crashes within the city boundaries. So a crash is defined as a collision between a vehicle and an obstacle or another vehicle, bicycle, or pedestrian. Crashes involving trains were not considered in this report, and crash data was gathered from the Arizona Crash Information System, which has police records of all crashes which have occurred within the state of Arizona. So the types of data we're going to be considering today is the total number of crashes that have occurred each year, different crash categories like injury severity, alcohol involvement, and mode type, crash location, time of day, weather and lighting conditions, demographics, and violations that resulted in crashes. All right, so we have two graphs here, both showing annual crashes. The blue colored bars are the ones in our study period, 2016 to 2021. And as you can see, there's about 1,900 crashes per year. And I do want to draw attention to 2020, where we did see a big reduction in crashes because of the pandemic restrictions. But we did pretty much go back to our normal levels in this last year in 2021. And just to give you the big picture, it also included data from 2012 to 2021, just to kind of see how we do kind of hover around that 1,900 crashes per year. All right, here we're looking at injury crashes. Injuries are sorted into possible injury, minor injury, and serious injury. And so this gives you some information on that. And also fatal crashes. And we have about anywhere from 4 to 10 fatal crashes per year. I think an average of around 6 in Flagstaff. It does fluctuate. We had a lot in 2019 and more in 2021. And this just breaks it down into interstate versus non-interstate crashes. As you can see for fatalities, there are quite a few that do occur on the interstate depending on the year, but there's usually a couple hundred interstate crashes that happen on the interstate, not within, or like in the city sort of deal. All right, so here we got crashes by month, and I do want to point out that October typically has the most crashes, followed by September and January, and that the spring and summer months of April, May, and June have the lowest number of crashes. This is also divided into no injury in the blue, injury crashes in the orange, and fatalities in the pink. Fatalities don't come up as easily because they're so small compared to the other numbers, but just want to point that out. And the injury crashes include possible injury, minor injury, and serious injury. So those are all included in that orange data. And here we go, it's pretty interesting. This is crashes by day of the week. Friday, and this is typical of other places as well from what I've seen, Friday has the most crashes of any day of the week, and Sunday usually has the least. And crashes by light condition, no injury, and injury crashes, typically about 73% of them occur during daylight conditions, but fatal crashes, a majority of them occur during dark or dawn and dusk conditions. This is crashes by time of day, also pretty interesting, 3 to 6 p.m. was the time that most crashes occur during like the PM rush hour. And of course, 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. was when the least amount of crashes occurred because there's not as many people on the road. This is crashes by age ranges. 18 to 25 experienced the highest number of crashes. And then 26 to 35, 36 to 45. Those were the two second highest categories. Gender percentages by age range. It does skew male, like a male, and this is, we didn't include passengers in this data. This is drivers, pedestrians, and bicyclists. Usually it is male, it's about 55% male, 45% female across age ranges. And now we get into crash types. And this is one I was actually very interested in, is that the most common crash type for all crashes is rear ends throughout the city, and followed by angle and single vehicle. And single vehicle is when a car strikes an object like a tree, a pole, or it rolls over. And so that's for all crashes. But for injury crashes, rear ends still make up the highest majority, followed by angle. But left turn crashes jumped up from 11% for all crashes to 15% for injury, because left turn crashes are usually more severe. And then for fatal crashes, pedestrians made up the largest portion of crash types, followed by single vehicle, and then rear end, side swipe, and so on. So now we're getting, and if you have any questions or if I'm going too fast, please stop me. I'm happy to answer questions. But now we're in a violation behavior that led to a crash, and the leading condition or behavior that caused a crash was speeding too fast for conditions, and this was followed by failed to yield right-of-way. And now we have alcohol involvement. So alcohol involvement is actually a very small portion of all crashes. There's only 5% of all crashes, or a little less than around 80 crashes per year that are caused by alcohol or have alcohol involved. But they are a big part of fatal crashes. Like about more than a third of all fatal crashes had alcohol involved in some way. So driving intoxicated is very dangerous. This is also very interesting. This is crashes in weather. And I was a little unexpected, but across injury, fatal, and all crashes, like it kind of stayed consistent. All crashes kind of occurred, or around 73% of all crashes occurred in clear weather conditions. And I thought maybe there'd be more injury crashes that were in the snow or in the rain, but for whatever reason, that was not the case. It all stayed kind of consistent. And now we're getting into heat maps. This shows you where all the like the highest density of crashes are occurring. You can kind of see Milton get highlighted pretty well from this graph. Also Highway 89 and Country Club, Ponderosa Parkway. Those are very high active areas. This is all the serious injury and fatal crashes within the town. Fatal being the red circles and serious injury being the yellow. And you can also see, again, that Milton kind of gets highlighted by serious injury and a few fatals, and that the interstate does have a lot of fatal incidents on them for vehicles. This is the same data, but for pedestrians. And we did notice a large grouping of fatal incidents near Highway 89 and Country Club. And same data, but for bicyclists. And here we have the 10 intersections with the highest total number of crashes. The number one intersection being Highway 89 and Country Club. It also had 28 injury crashes and 2 fatal crashes. And following that was Milton, Butler, Clay with 41 injury crashes and 0 fatal crashes. And now I want to talk about one example of past mitigation efforts that we've used. We did in the report also look at all of the most severe intersections, the intersections that had the most severe incidents, like that being serious and fatal crashes. And the number one intersection was Highway 89 and Marketplace. And we noticed, or this was before I came here, but they noticed that there was a lot of left turn crashes occurring at this intersection. It made up almost the highest category, which was pretty odd. Usually rear ends are the highest category, but left turns were an issue at this intersection. And so in 2019, they changed the phasing from permissive, I believe, or protected permissive to just protected left turns. And studying like the before and after, the before data being from 2014 to 2019, that 5 years, and the after data being 2019 to 2021, all the available data we have, looking at it per year, we did notice a decrease in total crashes. It went from 21 crashes per year to 12 crashes per year. And specifically left turns went from 7 per year to 1, and from 1 serious left injury crash per year to 0 serious injury crashes per year after the change. So we thought that was a good success. And now talking about recommendations. These are a few that I pulled from the report, and one of the big ones was signal review, because there's so many rear-end crashes at all the intersections in town. We thought it'd be worthwhile to investigate the yellow and red clearance times. According to Clearinghouse, which creates crash modification factors, just by adjusting the yellow and red times can have a big impact on rear-end crashes, reducing them by, I believe, around 30%. We also noticed Snowflake Drive and Trails End Highway 89 had 6 crashes in 2021, and there was a fatality included in those crashes. So we thought it would be worthwhile to investigate if it could warrant for a signal. Like, you need to have 5 crashes within a year to warrant for a signal, and they all need to be preventable by a signal being present. So some of the crashes were listed as unknown, so we hope to work with the police department and try to determine if those crashes could have been prevented by a signal, see if there's any additional information. And then the other area of interest was Highway 89 between Fanning Drive and Marketplace Drive, where we saw all those pedestrian fatalities. And we thought maybe we could investigate street lighting to see if that could be improved, and maybe a few other things that we could do. And thank you. That was my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. Is this document available to the public?
I don't think so yet, but I know that's something we're planning to do. I might need help from Jeff on this one.
Yeah, as soon as we wrap up the drafts, we'll post it. And I think we're pretty much there.
Okay. It's fantastic information. I think it really helps inform also priority projects. I mean, just thinking about what Martin had presented earlier, prioritizing those bike and ped projects, and how these might fit in. I think that heat map was really telling about the corridors and where we're seeing prevalence of accidents with injury, severe or worse. So it was excellent information. I really enjoyed, well, that's not the right term.
It's interesting.
It was very helpful. It was really helpful in thinking about transportation planning and Flagstaff and priorities. And I think we should make October like slow down and people. It's just, we spend so much time up here talking about and dealing with people's issues of speeding. And should be like, October is the recognize, slow down, enjoy the leaves, enjoy the environment you live in, and be safer. Right. That's, get on my soapbox about that. Commissioners, questions or comments? Other than slow down. Go ahead. Vice Chair Morley.
I also really appreciate this report. I think that serious injury, disproportionality of pedestrians and bikes is really interesting, and I think shows that investment need, just based on the severity of incidents. I think in terms of the recommendations, Mountain Line loves the Snowflake Highway 89 signal discussion. We would definitely want to be part of that. I think that there's additional reasons for a need for a signal there, so maybe that we can collaborate in terms of getting people from the bus stop to the Sacred Peaks Healthcare Center. So we were excited to see that one. Also maybe there's opportunity to collaborate related to the 89 between Fanning and Marketplace. There could be some opportunity there with some designs that we've done for an intersection. I don't know. It does have a pedestrian crossing if that's one of the issues. So just excited to see this and how it ties back to the bike ped stuff. And just, I don't know what the future of it is, but how do we start thinking forward about some of these trends or changing anything that we need to change on a bigger picture scale than just reacting after the fact? I don't know what that answer is. But.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm also curious to see as we go forward. This being the first one, I still am very open to learning more on how we can make it better and how we can address some of the bigger concerns. And I think that's the power of it being annual, is that we can keep learning each time we put it out and try to have a positive effect on the trends that we're seeing.
Commissioner Koenig.
Hi again. Thanks again for the presentation. I do think it's very interesting information, and I'm really curious to see how it's used for future planning. 20% of the accidents were failure to yield the right of way. And I'd be curious to have more details in those. Are those right turns on reds? Are those left turns across intersections, or left turns into traffic not across intersections to get into businesses? And just trying to understand, what other methods may be traffic. That seems like somewhere where you could put traffic management in place that might be able to eliminate the possibility for people to get in other people's way. I also noticed in one of the graphs, in the other section, it listed all of the items that were too small, and I did not use the crosswalk. Was listed as 0.34%, which is still 6 accidents per year. And I think this goes back to the question of, do we need more crosswalks? And some of the stuff that Martin presented, especially seeing those accidents out towards 89 in the mall. How can we, trying to understand better where people are trying to go and why they're not using crosswalks, and how we can help manage that and provide better solutions for them. My one other comment is that I'm not sure it's helpful to break out accidents based on gender. And so I would personally suggest that's not put in future presentations.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Koenig. David or Jeff, do you have a response to his question about the right turns? Do you know the answer to that?
This question was failure to yield. Yeah, that's often red light running, I think. It can be stop sign running. There can be a handful of things. Actually, red light running might be broken out on that one.
Yeah, I think red light
That one
running is
is
broken
broken
out,
out
but
in
I
that
think
category.
not yielding on a right turn was one of them. I'd have to do more research on those. And I also should mention that those violations, like 35% of all crashes had no violation listed. It was no improper action, like the officer couldn't determine if there was a violation, I believe is what happened, or maybe they got to the scene and they said, okay, no violation. But of the 65% that did have a violation listed, those are the ones we considered. But as for failure to yield right of way, that was one that we were talking about earlier, and that we still need to do more research on to clarify it. Sometimes these manuals don't give the best explanation for what these violations are, so that's something we'll have to come back to.
Thank you, David. Go ahead, Jeff. Jeff, and then Commissioner Koenig.
I was just going to say, with some of the mapping is pretty interesting where the fatalities occur. And one of the things we've been talking about, and we found in some of the crash reports from other cities, is each time a fatality occurs, that you have some sort of team that gets together and takes a look at the report. We do, but not every time, because they're infrequent and they're usually not a pattern, but it still can be really interesting to see what can be done with some of these fatalities. And I don't know if you noticed on the map, but a number of them are on the interstate, and they're classified as pedestrians.
And there was a cyclist one too, and that one struck me as interesting.
Yeah, I don't know cycling is allowed on our interstate.
And on this one, and this is kind of like the downfall of using these dots sometimes, is that one's actually on Foxlair or Solier? Solier, yeah. So it's right next to the interstate. So that one wasn't on the interstate. This one was on one of the exit ramps, and this one was at Beaver and Butler for the bike crashes.
So where I was going with the pedestrians on the interstate, often those are actually drivers out working on their vehicle, and they're coded as a pedestrian. So there's enough. I mean, it doesn't explain anything exactly, but it's just something to know about how the coding works, that there was 4 or 5 there in the 5 years, and we can check to make sure, but traditionally or typically, they're not people trying to cross the interstate. They're actually drivers working on cars.
Thank you. Commissioner Koenig, I think you had a follow-up. Go ahead.
I was just saying thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Excellent, thanks. All right, any other commissioner comments or questions? Thanks again, David.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. We are jumping ahead, and we're going to push item 5, role of transportation commissioners, to December. Thank you for being flexible on that. Old business, we have none. Concluding general business, you can review those reports. The links are provided in the agenda for the Bicycle Advisory and Pedestrian Advisory Committee meetings. There is one tomorrow. I will not be able to attend that one. So moving to informational items 2 from commissioners and staff, starting with Jeff.
The committee meeting tomorrow is canceled.
Thank you for the update. That's good. I couldn't make it.
Just to give you a quickie, on that last
Thanks.
item, role of transportation commissioners, I'll send that out. I have a presentation. It's really just summarizing this section of the code, but I think you'll find it pretty interesting what's in. If you haven't looked recently or before, it's interesting what's in the commission roles and responsibility and what is not. Yeah, I can jump in. Four-seater locket, HSIP update. We have slid a year on that project, so we were really hoping to get out there this summer, and it will be another year from now. So what is that? Summer of 24. Crazy. So construction summer of 24.
Good to know.
I think that's all I have for 2 froms. Do you want me to talk about next meeting or not yet?
Let me do a check-in here with commissioners. Any 2 froms? Okay. Go for it.
As usual, this is kind of an aggressive list, but these are some of the things that we potentially can bring forward in December if we can make good progress on them. So that's all I have to say about those, actually.
Okay. Go ahead, Vice Chair Morley.
A couple other items potentially, and I know the list is long, so I'll start with the one that might help. To Councilmember Shimoni's point, should we consider the frequency of this commission's meetings? And I wonder if that should be a topic of discussion next time. I think also if we could bring a potential budget recommendation letter for consideration of the commission. I also heard, here's a couple more. I heard somebody mention school transportation. I don't know that that has to be December, but I do think that there are groups working on that, and so it could be a good item to come forward. We could bring Flagstaff in motion at some point. December would be appropriate, but again, I don't know how many items we have on that agenda, and we wouldn't need action of any sort, so we can talk about prioritization. And then I'm just curious generally about, we've had several requests tonight for the commission to discuss the neighborhood requests, and I'm mostly curious to hear what others think about that.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll start. I know that there has been some interest about having more frequent meetings, maybe monthly. I know some of it is logistics with staff and location and being able to host these monthly. But I have heard from commissioners in the past that having more frequent and so they're not so long would be helpful. So I think that's something definitely worth discussing. I think as far as the the residential traffic calming projects, I would love to see this, the plan updated, the policy and the program updated, and to push those through to push those through and check those that are current and active against that, to be able to see which ones rise to the point of coming in front of the commission or the action of mitigation. So I wonder, in that spirit, is it worth considering having a November meeting to be able to move that forward, that particular item?
And I'm the chair in December.
You would be the chair at the next meeting, Vice Chair Morley. And I look for some feedback from you, Jeff, as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure
this.
who you were asking, if it was commissioners or.
I
or
think it's
staff.
both staff and commissioners because it needs to be a group decision.
Yeah, so having monthly meetings is is doable for sure. We can figure that out. January and July usually get canceled, so really you're just talking about adding 4 meetings a year. If any of you are involved in organizing monthly meetings, it's really hectic to get a meeting every 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So you typically wouldn't see the same thing 2 months in a row because it's just too fast. It's like 2.5 weeks in between the meetings. If you think about when we're sending agendas out and then rehashing today, we lose this week and part of last. So that's part of the reason. Well, we're required to meet quarterly, and so we bumped that up to every other month. And yeah, we certainly could do more, but it does take a lot more staff time. And right now we're struggling to get these together every other month. Yeah, so we could hustle. We have another council presentation next week that's taking a bunch of time, but we could hustle to try to get this residential management plan in. I gotta look at the calendar, but it would be like 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks. Back to you.
Yeah, and I know that in some of our off months, we've actually had special meetings for specific items. And there's some benefit for keeping that to where if you do have something, it's just that particular item, and maybe that is a bit of a compromise, being able to look at those off months as special items or special meetings for critical items. I'd like to hear, is that more manageable on the staff end if it's a special meeting for one item?
Yeah, it is, because we can just drop everything we're doing to get ready for that meeting. It's all about staffing. I mean, we're just really struggling with all the things going on right now. So yeah, I'm a little pessimistic, sorry. But it's some reality because we're just really struggling to get this stuff
Absolutely, absolutely. Vice Chair Morley.
Would it be easier if we all acknowledge that the length of Transportation Commission meetings should change instead of more meetings, that we just commit to more time at meetings?
So we try to go 2 hours now, but occasionally we bump over. Yeah, when we're here, as long as you want to be here. And we're pretty good at 2 hours. I mean, occasionally we've had some public inputs that just run a really long time. And not to backtrack too much on the residential traffic management program, but that's that transparency and that opportunity to have a public meeting. If we get rid of this process, then there isn't an opportunity to bring the community together unless we just hold it another night, have another meeting for those things. So we'll talk about it in more detail, but just something that I didn't get a chance to chime in, and it's just something to think about because I know neighborhoods do appreciate. I mean, they don't like coming, but they do, I think, getting together and talking about these things. So there's a balance. Yeah, well, I mean, we can go longer. That's fine.
Thank you. Other commissioner thoughts on that? Yeah, so Commissioner Hansen, and then I think I saw Commissioner Koenig in the chat. So we'll go in that order. Go ahead.
I think that the additional meeting or longer meeting definitely would be beneficial, give opportunity to talk through things, understanding staff side, and the challenge that comes with putting together that amount of information in a 4-week cycle on top of everything else and all the other responsibilities. So see it from both sides. I think it would be helpful to get through with the quantity of information. It certainly seems that there needs to be a little bit more time from our side, be able to meet and talk through to get through the agenda items, whether that's a longer meeting or having them more frequently, or even just having the occasional special additional meeting that comes in between the regularly scheduled ones. I think that would be beneficial.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Koenig.
Thanks. I support meeting more often and or meeting longer if necessary. Yeah, I hear Jeff and his concern about the staff not having enough time. But for now we've been going over almost every time in time, and we routinely push items off to the future. And so, yeah, it seems like in the short term, at least, we could certainly meet more often, and whether it's 2.5 hours, 3 hours, extend the time as well.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Koenig. Commissioner Kraft, do you have comments or thoughts you'd like to share on this one?
Not really. It's been covered, I think. I mean, just what Joe said just now is about how I feel. We could go more often or go longer. But I mean, I've been one of the voices saying, asking about going longer, and I know the staff have, issues being able to pull that off. So some kind of balance in there. I think we're being as efficient as we can be. But that's also, to me, another argument for, being careful about what we take on. I know that's the item that we're putting off till next time is what are we supposed to be doing? But I don't think we can afford to be operating on a granular level with, every street that has a problem. The city is better equipped to do that. And we need to define our scope as being dealing with bigger issues related to transportation in the town. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Kraft. Great comments and conversation. Sounds like there's a lot of flexibility, Jeff. Recognizing the number of agenda items and getting through them, whether it means going longer, having an extra meeting here or there, really just trying to work together, that it makes the most sense with the resources you have and the time that we have.
So did I hear a request for November for sure? Is that what we're looking at?
I didn't hear it for certain. I didn't.
Okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner Hanson.
Just an additional thought, kind of as we're talking through this. When items get pushed like tonight, what are the options as far as following up with? Can there be, like tonight we pushed an item, could we then plan to follow up with that on the Thursday, even if it's a shortened meeting, just to get that one cleared so it's not pushing and making the December meeting and then perpetuating that? The pushing of those items, the material's already essentially prepared, just need to go through it. It would probably be, fairly expedited. And then kind of follow up to that is, could that supplemental meeting, if it's more convenient to do a virtual, or does it need to be in person just to make it less of a onerous commitment for everybody involved? Mm-hmm. Just a thought, something combination of what we're talking about.
Yeah, good thought.
This room is heavily booked, so yeah, I would, if we did something out of sequence, so this room gets booked for the year, and we kind of grab the first Wednesday nights. So yeah, any other night of the week, we'd need a different room or just do it online, which would be totally fine. We know how to do that. But yeah, getting this room other than tonight is really a challenge.
Is it helpful for staff to expedite the residential management updates? Do you feel the urgency to get that done in November, or do you, with the request that you have on hand and the communications, is it something that December, as we go into the winter months, is an appropriate timeline?
So it depends on how we manage implementation. If you're gonna take neighborhoods back to step one because we have a new process and get the 5 signatures and that type of thing, then the sooner the better, because I think that's part of our challenge. Not that there aren't problems or there whatever, but getting more than one person. Right now it takes one person to start the whole process and essentially push the whole process for a long time. that seemed to be one of the big lessons we learned. So if implementation is to back up with some of these, or wherever they're at in the process, then they start into the new process with some of those 70% or whatever we turn up, and 5 signatures, that would be really helpful, because I think as we heard from Boulder Point, we don't have, we thought we had consensus, we don't have consensus, but potentially, I mean, we never, yeah, you get it. So it depends on how we implement it. If we're gonna back some things up to use the new process, then the sooner the better for us, for sure.
Vice Chair Morley, do you propose a special meeting in November to review the residential management updates?
Can I ask one more question of staff? Do you guys want to back projects up to the beginning and start them over, or just move them forward?
I think it'd be really helpful to, I hadn't thought about it much, but I think wherever they're at in the process, it would be nice to transition to the new process, yes. Because I think some of the consensus building and those requirements, I think are gonna be really helpful. As Councilman McCarthy said, there's no, because I mean, it's hard, right? If somebody shows up at your door and says, hey, sign this, you're likely to sign it. If it's anonymous and you really have a chance to look through it, it's a little bit different. And then just getting that whole block to agree, because something that's really common in the valley is putting in speed humps, and it's really common in the valley to pull them back out. And so that's a big reason why these things were developed this way, to get consensus, because there's negatives to speed humps. There's the braking noise, the accelerating noise, cars going thump thump. And anyways, it's good to get really good consensus on these devices before they go in.
And that's something we also saw with Peoria. Like, they said they had issues with people going door to door and having people sign this petition. And a lot of people didn't actually know what they were signing. Like, the person who was doing the petition signing might not have been very forthcoming. It's like, hey, you don't like speed, sign this. And then like, they'd get these things installed. And in Peoria, like, after a year, you can have the speed humps. You can have the speed humps removed. And I did see that they do have a petition right now to have some speed humps removed on this street. So getting the consensus, we think, is very important, because Councilmember McCarthy also says, like, oh, you put the circles in, we just got to wait a year before we can take them out, or like go in there and it'd be a shame to put all this investment into that project without having the community behind it.
So knowing that that's how you guys want to use the process, do you want to have a special meeting in November or keep it in December?
I love these meetings, so you should ask Jeff.
Well, I mean, I think the document's actually pretty much ready to go. There's probably a little more once or twice through it again, but it's pretty much ready to go. We just knew there wasn't enough time to walk through it tonight in detail. So that one's easy because it's pretty much ready to go. Yes.
Yeah.
So is that a yes, let's have a December meeting to do it?
In November? Yeah. Yeah. November 2nd, yeah. So you'd have an agenda in 3 weeks from us, I think.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, well, it's been a pleasure being up here for the past few years, with running a meeting through COVID too. That was, whew, those are and some big topics. But yeah, I would thank my fellow commissioners, and big thanks to Jeff and David and Stephanie and Reed and the whole city team over the years. So it's been my pleasure. I will be here through December. Commit to that, absolutely. My term did expire in July, and I think it's been more than 6 years, I think, on the commission. So, if there are others that would like to serve on the commission, I would like to provide that space for them to do so. All righty, with that, I would like to move to adjourn.
I second the motion.
All right, and I have a feeling we're all in favor, so thank you all. Be safe, drive slow, or just take the bus. Good night.
Someone's got hit on a bus.